This is a crazy game of chess from 2011 in which Magnus Carlsen is playing Hikaru Nakamura and he ends up sacrificing his rook for a knight in order to get a big attack against Hikaru Nakamura. This is a fantastic game of chess. Let's jump right into it. Magnus Carlsen, playing white, starts the game with the move e4, Hikaru plays e5, and Magnus plays the Italian game with the move bishop to c4. Now what happens is they go into the gioco piano, which is known for being a very slow maneuvering game, although the way that these players play it, it gets very aggressive very quickly. So after the next couple of moves, without pointing out anything and going into too much theory, I will note that Magnus Carlsen plays a very interesting plan here. Now, this knight on b1 really wants to be on the square of g3, because if it can get to this square, it's going to be controlling a whole lot of the black position. So, how does Magnus get this knight to g3? Well, normally white will simply castle, move the rook to e1, then he'll play knight to d2, knight to f1, and knight to g3. However, Magnus Carlsen decides to do something else, and so he plays the move knight to d2, then the bishop moves, so black has their own plan, knight to f1, now the pawn is pushed to stop the bishop from trying to pin the knight, and Magnus plays the move knight to g3. So he has moved the knight here without castling, and this makes a big difference in the game, because after both players castle, white has no intention of playing the move rook to e1. Magnus Carlsen is being more aggressive, and he's going to try to keep his rook on this file, open it up, and attack black. So what are the next moves? Bishop to e6. Now, the idea of this move from Hikaru is that if Magnus Carlsen takes, Hikaru will be very happy with all these strong pawns in the center. Yes, these are doubled pawns, but these are not really weaknesses. It's very hard to attack, and black's rook is now very active with the open file. So you do not want to take this bishop. And instead of doing this, Magnus Carlsen simply plays the move h3, and then a couple moves later, he decides to play the move bishop to e3, trying to trade his own bishop for the same idea. Of course, if black takes, now white has a lot of pawns in the center, and their own rook is opening up, which justifies the move never playing the rook to e1. So, of course, Magnus would really like this, but this is not played by Hikaru, and so what happens is the knight hops to e7, and now Magnus Carlsen is trying to prove why the knights on these squares are very nice. He's trying to take control of this square on f5. Now, Hikaru is obviously copying Magnus, putting the knights on these squares, and here Magnus puts the knight on f5. Hikaru is trying to trade off this knight because it's very strong here, putting lots of pressure on the black position, and here Magnus decides to take the knight, queen takes, and finally here Magnus says, you know what, you're not going to take my bishop, I will take your bishop, and after rook takes, I will play the move f4, being aggressive, trying to attack black. And so in this position, Hikaru plays the move c5. And so now Hikaru's plan becomes somewhat clear. He's trying to take space on the queen side, and white is simply trying to attack black. So what happens is the move bishop to c2. This may not look like a very obvious move as to why he plays this move. I mean, the bishop's probably not going to take that pawn. But at some point in the future, if these pawns disappear, this bishop is going to be a great attacker on the king, and you'll see that's exactly what happens in the game. So b5 by Hikaru taking space, queen to d2, and now what happens is black is simply trying to activate his pieces on the queen side and take lots of space. So a3 because Magnus is somewhat respecting this idea of pushing the pawn, and now a5. So black is taking tons of space, but Magnus Carlsen is somewhat ignoring it. He moves his rook up, simply trying to double the rooks and putting maximum pressure. Now the pawn pushes, Magnus takes, and here this rook has control over the a file, but Magnus decides that the a file doesn't matter that much and plays the move rook a f1, doubling the rooks and putting pressure. Now the game starts to heat up here, pawn takes, and here the move pawn takes pawn. Now, if the pawn does not take, things get very, very, very dicey for black. Let's say black simply tries to double their rooks here. Well, now black is in a lot of trouble because after pawn takes, the rook can be sacrificed with rook takes knight. You cannot take with the queen, obviously, because the rook will take back, so you have to take with the pawn. But at this point, there's a huge attack against the black king. The queen is coming, the knight is coming, and you are just getting absolutely checkmated or losing a lot of material because white has a huge attack. So you cannot allow this, and that's why Hikaru decides to, instead of letting the pawn be taken, he takes the pawn himself, and now he goes for this very interesting idea where he, after the pawns are traded in the center, he pins the rook to the queen. So this is a very good idea because now if the knight ever goes back, you cannot take the knight because the queen will simply take. So Magnus moves his king, the knight moves back here, and it cannot be taken because then the queens will be traded, and this is very, very bad for white because you cannot be down a queen. So what happens next is bishop to d1. Now, the idea of this move is very simple. Magnus wants to play the move h4, and at some point he might want to play the move h5, and now this pawn will be protected by the bishop, And so this is a very, essentially just he's preparing for future moves of pushing this pawn. And now here, Hikaru makes a mistake. Hikaru plays the move rook f to b8. And here, the game is almost lost for black from a practical standpoint. Now, the reason for this is that Magnus Carlsen sacrifices his rook after playing the move h4, forcing the queen back. He's able to sacrifice the rook for the knight, and this gets a brilliant for a huge amount of reasons. Now, let's firstly look at what he should have done instead. Instead of moving his rook here, he needed to play the move h5. And the reason is that after white tries to attack this queen and tries to force the queen to move, the queen can move here, and now there is no rook sacrifice because the rook is pinned to the queen. However, what happened in the game is that instead of trying to play the move h5, what happens is that black moves the rook, and now after the queen is hit, the queen is forced to g6, and now the sacrifice is possible because there's no pin on the queen. So rook takes knight, and after pawn takes, this position is very, very bad for black because these rooks are not really a threat to the white king. So what happens? The queen develops to a very natural square. They're attacking pawns and putting lots of pressure. Okay, so now black is trying to put pressure on white position. And okay, if white is not careful, you could just lose the game. If you take this pawn, rook takes g2, check, and after king takes, you would be in a whole lot of trouble with this check coming. You might think that you can simply block with the rook and you're simply up material, but black can actually take your queen and you're unable to win back your queen because this rook pins your rook to the king. And let's say that after this check, you're forced to go back here. Well, now you're just going to simply get checkmated by black, and this is not a very fun way to lose the game. But obviously, Magnus Carlsen does not fall for this, and instead he plays a much better move, which is a bishop to h5. And this is a very good move because he forces the queen to move back, and then he moves his bishop to f3 to stop any shenanigans with the rook coming here. And now because he's attacked the queen and forced it to move back, the move knight to h5 is going to come with tempo, hitting the queen and hitting the pawn on the square of f6. So here, black should really probably try to move back the queen, so when the knight move comes, he's not getting double attacked. But what he does instead is he plays the move rook to a8, which is the last mistake that he makes in this game. And so here he plays the move d5. And this move forces the bishop to move back. The knight hops into the game. The queen is forced to move back. And here, after the knight takes on f6 with check, notice that all of black's pieces are essentially not doing anything. This queen is desperately trying to stop the king from getting checkmated. These rooks are over here with vague threats of something, but there's really no activity from the black pieces. The bishop is on its starting square. What is black doing? So the king moves over to the corner, and here after the move rook to c1, it's a bad sign when your opponent can simply just try to develop their only not super active piece into the game to attack your king, and you can't do anything about it. This is not a good sign for Hikaru. And unfortunately here, after he plays the move king to g7, feeling the pressure, the move e5 wins the game on the spot. If you do not take this pawn, the rook is simply coming and you're simply losing the game. So pawn takes, and here knight to h5 check seals the deal. The king moves over here, and after the move bishop to e4 check, I believe Hikaru resigned, simply because if you move the king back, pawn takes, and now the king and the rook are hit, and you lose one of them, and you're going to lose the rook. So instead of this, if the king is to move back to this square, well, now you simply play the move queen to g3 check, and after the king moves, now you're able to fork both pieces. There's actually technically a better move than taking the rook, but this is the simplest way to win. Simply being up a rook is absolutely winning at this level. This is truly a brilliant game because he was able to sacrifice his rook at the right time, and I find this game to be fascinating because of how quickly black's position falls apart. Thanks for watching the video, and subscribe for more.